Rainwater pooled in the ditch like a dark mirror, trembling each time the wind swept across the open field. That's where I first saw him. Just a shadow at first, curled so tightly into himself that he looked more like a discarded jacket than a living creature. But then he lifted his head, and his eyes, God, his eyes, wide, glassy, pleading yet resigned in that way only animals abandoned by the world ever are. His ribs pressed so sharply against his skin they looked like they might break through. Mud clung to his fur in patches, as if the earth itself had tried to swallow him. When I stepped closer, he flinched so violently that his entire body folded inward. Not a growl, not a bark, just fear, shaking through him like electricity. I didn't speak. I simply knelt, letting the rain run down my arm as I held out my hand. For a moment he stared, frozen between hope and terror. Then, with a trembling breath, the young German shepherd lifted himself from the ditch and, against every wound life had carved into him, took one weak step toward the first kind hand he'd seen in a very long time.
The ditch that held his fear. The story begins on the outskirts of a rural road where the German shepherd, later named Echo, has been hiding for days. The chapter unfolds like a somber memory. Mud, rain, the faint sound of distant traffic, and a dog too weak to stand. Echo is starving, soaked to the bone, and terrified of human contact. His breaths are shallow, his body temperature dangerously low. When the narrator discovers him, the ditch becomes almost symbolic, a place where Echo had decided quietly to stop fighting. But the moment the narrator kneels, everything shifts. The dog lifts his head, torn between fear and the slightest flicker of instinctive hope. The chapter ends the moment Echo makes his first choice in days. He takes a single, trembling step toward the extended hand.
The hand that led him out. This chapter focuses on the fragile rescue attempt. Echo collapses repeatedly as the narrator tries to carry or coax him toward the vehicle. His breathing becomes erratic, and mud smears across the rescuer's clothes as his body trembles uncontrollably. At the animal clinic, the vet's face tightens with concern. Hyperthermia, dehydration, malnutrition, and possible internal injury. The exam becomes the first real suspense point. Echo's heartbeat falters, and for a moment, the vet warns that they may lose him. But the warmth of blankets, IV fluids, and gentle voices pull him back. When he finally opens his eyes again, they briefly lock onto the narrators, raw, uncertain, but alive.
The fight inside his body. The diagnosis hits hard. Severe infection, organ stress, and dangerously low red blood cell count. Echo is not just injured, his body is shutting down from prolonged neglect. The vet outlines the risk. Without a transfusion and aggressive antibiotics, Echo may not make it through the next 24 hours. This chapter explores the emotional storm that follows, the helplessness of waiting, the ache of watching an animal fight for breath, the moments when machines beep too slowly or too quickly. But even in the chaos, small miracles appear. Echo accepts food from the narrator's hand for the first time. His tail gives the faintest twitch when he hears a soft voice. These tiny moments keep hope alive.
The first light he trusted. Against the odds, Echo survives the emergency scare. The alarm was due to a sudden fever spike, but he responds to treatment and slowly begins to mend. This chapter focuses on the fragile early days of recovery, shaking limbs attempting to stand, hesitant steps, and the haunting way Echo still flinches at every raised hand or sudden sound. The narrator visits daily, becoming the only human Echo seems able to tolerate. A bond forms, quiet, delicate, rooted in patience rather than expectation. For the first time, Echo accepts gentle touch without recoiling. When the shelter staff discuss transferring him to a kennel, Echo presses himself against the narrator's leg, trembling with silent panic.
The home he walked into. The final chapter summary covers Echo's transition from survival to belonging. The narrator brings him home temporarily, but Echo's eyes follow every step, every breath, as if terrified of being left again. Slowly, the house becomes familiar. The soft blanket, the sound of food pouring into a bowl, the warm patch of sunlight on the rug. Echo begins to play cautiously, sleep deeply, and move without fear. But the emotional climax comes when something triggers an old memory, a slammed door or a dark corner, and Echo collapses into panic, undoing weeks of progress. The narrator must decide whether they can truly give Echo what he needs. After a long night on the floor beside him, the answer becomes clear.